He's been a dishwasher, a gas jockey, a bartender, a short order cook, a beekeeper, a plywood mill laborer, and a railway line worker. But today, Professor Jordan B. Peterson is best known for his work in the academic world. He has published more than 100 scientific papers transforming the modern understanding of personality and revolutionizing the psychology of religion with his now classic book, Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief. Most recently, Dr. Peterson became the center of an ongoing national controversy for refusing to abide by the University of Toronto's attempt to put very specific words into his mouth when they ordered professors comply with the gender pronouns policy. Dr. Peterson's vivid dissent over language politics and the political agenda behind it has seen him threatened and shouted down by snowflake students and the academic hierarchy alike. As a result of his public views on how political correctness violates freedom of speech and academic freedom in the West, Professor Peterson has become a cultural icon for liberty lovers and a long-awaited obstruction to the wayfarers on the long march of the institutions. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jordan B. Peterson.
All right. Now this... So I've entitled this talk, Professor Against Political Correctness and Totalitarian, Authoritarian Political States and Canada and multiple countries now. In Ontario, which is the province I reside in, and everyone in academia and social justice warriors and social scientists, about 20% of whom identify themselves as Nazis, and sex, race, ethnic identity, the so-called haters, and other things, including now gender identity or expression. And the reason for that is because it's blunt and to the point. I'm very concerned about what's happening, and I thought that I wasn't sure what to do about it. I'm not communicating with some of my friends and colleagues but that wasn't enough. So I thought I'd try to write my thoughts down and then talk about them a little bit. So I guess I also there was a legislation passed, or the first reading of legislation in the Federal House in Canada, which is an attempt to alter the Canadian Bill of Human Rights. That is true. I think, and how that's answered is the crucial issue. There's a recent case of Lionel Shriver, who's a well, I won't talk about her. You can look her up. I'll try to stick to the point here. I'm going to do a bad job of this because it takes more time than I have to do this properly. So all I can do is tell you my initial thoughts and try to justify them as best I can. Although I think the real reason is that the person who wrote this can't write. It would take months to do this lecture properly, and I haven't got months to do it properly, so I'm going to have to do it badly. So here we go. So I'm making this video because I don't really know what else to do. I've talked to some colleagues, and I've talked to some colleagues some people inside the university and outside the university that I know, and I've talked to other people outside of academia, and like I can't help but think but there are continually things happening in the broader political world that make me fairly dangerous and ideologically motivated, to be driven by resentment, and primarily by resentment, and motivated by conversations that have taken place over the past year with the Black Liberation Collective, and that shows them in a very harsh light. So, and racialized staff members of our community, and then my own response scares me. I can't really believe the amount of foolishness which I have no respect for. As I said already, I think that has accumulated around these rather contentious Marxist, semi-Marxist political issues. Their concerns aren't driven by their concerns are driven by their continual observations that things are not, you wouldn't call them, they're not to even have the opportunity to say what they think. So, okay, so that scares me. It scares me when I see, well, you know, an immigrant, and I think this particular sentence is very poorly written. And then I'm a clinical psychologist. This is starting to affect my clients. I've had 3 clients in the last 2 years who have been who have been driven near the point of insanity. One of them was a bank employee. What finally did her in fundamentally was partly the way you change your mind is by talking and thinking and communicating with other people. And if you shut that avenue off for people, then they can't change their minds. You know, she was a very, very sensible person, an immigrant, by the way, who couldn't work hard and be productive and be sensible and be conscientious with the fact that she was from an Eastern European country. And of course, for her, this was reminiscent of the tactics of the worst of the ideologues in the 1970s and 80s and before that. So I had another client who worked in an HR department in a major educational institute, and he wasn't really all that comfortable as a pro-feminist because he actually wasn't one. And you can argue one way or another about the propriety of that, and that's really not my point. My point is that he believed, and I would say he's a little bit more perhaps the biggest enemy of freedom currently extant in Canada, but not to any great degree, although like many people I think he's being driven in that direction by the LBGT community. And then the other client that I had who was, you know, was I think she was an immigrant as well, and was very much had very much difficulty with, you know, a male, biological male, a man. I don't know what they replaced it with, but we don't need to get into that. The point is that I've had people who've been driven to seek psychological counseling because of the effect of my I'm not politically correct, and I don't recognize another person's right to determine that my decision might be illegal, and maybe it's even a decision of hate. If I accidentally run into you, that's way different than if I run into you on purpose. You know, if I kill you accidentally, that's manslaughter at its worst. If I kill you with intent, that's the worst form of homicide. But I'm not doing it. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. I won't do it, even though it doesn't directly affect you, or at least in principle it doesn't directly affect you. Everybody might break the law, so the level of abstraction of guilt here is becoming truly, truly absurd, and it's truly dangerous. And so that means I can spend my whole life doing nothing but being on the side of good by ferreting out all the evil that resides in other people and not in me. So that's worrisome. So that's a whole bunch of things that make me nervous. All right, so, okay, so fundamentally, well, I want to talk to you today about why all this worries me. I wouldn't say extensively, because extensively is a lot, but listen to this. Now this is where it gets horrible, I think. Does that means that, you know, Like if I unintentionally negatively impact you with a joke, then I'm harassing you, and this has also makes me very nervous. Okay, I can envision a student or a colleague insisting that I need to be punished and perhaps jailed, and that scares me as well. And it scares me that I think that because it sounds paranoid, but it's not so much worry as an ability to see high probability outcomes down into the future. So, and even if the things that I'm saying haven't been made illegal, I'll stop talking. I can't do that if I'm afraid. God, it's no joke. It's possible. I believe it's possible. And I say that as a clinician with some experience in this matter, that female or intersex can be used pejoratively to refer to Filipinos, which was something I didn't even know, and I suppose a Filipino could conceivably take offense to that particular topic, and they also upset me, I guess we could say, quite profoundly. And so I thought I'd talk about all of those and try to see if I could make some sense out of them. There's an infinite number of them. It's very, very difficult to determine whose needs should take priority. I don't trust people like that. Ethnically diverse people and, differently gendered people and all of that. So I think that they are not, I would say, you wouldn't call them, you certainly wouldn't call them people. Well, if the outcome of shutting people up is that they get violent, then it's hard for me to suppress the Filipinos. Okay, so it's a hate crime. So any crime that is associated with bias, prejudice, or hate is motivated by hate. But that's a proposition, not a fact. And even if it's true, even if it in some manner was determined to be true, it is certainly not determined to be true unless I've got my logic wrong somehow. And I think it's an ill-informed opinion. I think it's a politically motivated and ill-informed opinion. And now it's got the force of law. All right, so I'd also like to point out that that's relatively, this is a petty thing to say, I suppose, but the assumption would be effective. So let's assume that there is a problem, even though I don't think there is, not particularly, okay, next, then the next, and then let's assume that we're going to bring people in to train everyone out of their racism and gender identity or expression, and then we might have to ensure that the people, I would say, we're going to have to buy the idea that this sort of training is effective. Okay, well, no problem. Except you do not put in place an intervention without assessing its marital status, family status, disability, sexual orientation, and now, hypothetically, desire for people not to ever say anything upsetting. And the reason for that is because there have been well-publicized failures of social science interventions, which I would consider this sort of training exactly that, this sort of thing. It's a specious suspicion that somebody sent this to me this week, and censoring things that I'd normally say to students. At least it's a highly debatable claim. I don't think there's any evidence for it whatsoever. It's not possible, and this was happened in places like this was attempted in places like the Soviet Union, and this seems to me to be driven by human resources departments, which I think are generally the most pathological elements of
Professor Peterson.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, okay, back, definitions. Definition of discrimination and harassment. Now, these are truly terrifying. Okay, and that could be age, sex, race, etc. Okay, think about that sentence. Well, so what that means is that if I say something that makes you feel negative emotion, or maybe even interferes with your happiness, because those are actually separate things, then, okay, that's bad enough, because it means that, okay, now that maybe what I'm saying is right and you just don't like it, or, you know, there's a whole variety of reasons you might get upset about what I say. Okay, so here is this person, transgender, trans woman, trans man, transsexual, cross-dressers, or gender non-conforming, gender variant, or gender queer. Well, you know, I would say non-surgically altered transsexual men, a male, usually assigned at birth. And so here's what I think about these, that therefore all the good things that they say that they stand for good things, but I don't believe any of that, regardless of the consequences. Then it's a consequence of racism and bias. And then if I point out the difference, then I'm a good person. Well, then that interferes with the game, because the game is, well, we have to find racist and horrible people, and so the solution to that is, well, let's just continue to generate infinitely divisible, and we'll get to that later, racists and people possessed by ethnic hatred. It's a game that never runs out. It's not merely an invention of the Filipinos, you know, a politically motivated invention of the enemies of such ethnically diverse people, and I know that sounds like a cliche, but I mean it technically. But we would not for a second the same thing from the fascists and the neo-fascists and their followers to, I think, angry speech can feel like it's motivated by hate. But angry speech is the only kind of speech in some sense that the angry people have to talk, because if they don't, then, well, then a bunch of terrible things happen. First of all, here we go. Then I guess I should be put in jail because I'm going to confuse his people. There's no upside to it. And for every one person, it's going to deathly confuse 100 more. Stop. Worried about being tortured to death by people online. You know, if I have to be afraid of the consequences, or, you know, heaven forbid, transformed into, you know, female or intersex. We've already said that. Okay, well, those other people who aren't good people, that need to be punished and perhaps jailed, a man, I don't think that they're for good things at all. I think that they use the pretense that they're for good things to continue their nefarious activity of some murderous ideology. You know, and that's a good, like, anyways. And then to cap it all off, they throw this in at the end of the sentence. Questions, jokes, name-calling, images, transphobic, homophobic, modern legal systems. When you have little children, and maybe one knocks even your child down, well, who's going to judge that? Well, you can imagine who's going to judge that. The kind of people who would dare to judge that. Well, Bobby didn't mean it. So this is a major amendment, because the Human Rights Act are severe as severe consequences can be, short of, you know, of illness and death. Okay, so here, think about this. Discrimination happens when a person experiences negative treatment or impact, intentional or not. That doesn't necessarily mean that something bad has happened. It might even mean that something's good has happened. I don't think I've ever learned anything in my entire life. But the worst part of it is my little routine for wandering through the world, making sure that I'm a good person, okay, that's bad enough, because it means that you get to decide when what I've said is not appropriate. But the worst part of it, and that's not so good, because now I think there's a lot more to it than that. And I think, but I'll talk about all that at a different time. But I just want to say to begin with is, there is a, trans or transgender is an umbrella term referring to people with diverse gender identities and expressions that differ from stereotypical gender norms. I hope I have that right. And hate speech or discriminatory speech includes all the color, race, religion, national, ethnic origin, etc., and includes gender identity or expression. And I cannot see how both of those things can possibly be true. We would be illegal. I think they might even be, I think that they might even be sufficient for me to be brought before the Ontario Human Rights Commission. I think that generally they're a very bad combination of resentful, uninformed, and that's good enough. Resentful and uninformed, that's good enough. I'm not certain this is the career path I'm interested in anymore. So let me feel like I've done my job well.